What is up? And welcome back to the OK Noble Dev channel. Tell me what you think about the new logo. You like it? If this is your first video and you haven't seen the previous logo, it's on the screen now. I like it. I like it more. But anyway, this is another Indie Game Devlog, and today we're going over the vortexes or vortex eye and clusters. So they're kind of the same thing, but not really. They're both obstacles. They're both new obstacles, and they're kind of complicated. So stick with me through the video, and hopefully you'll understand by the end of it. If you guys like this video, like the video, and if you like the channel as a whole, subscribe to the channel. Only if you want to, obviously. So these obstacles are, well, first let's get into an explanation of what the game is real quick. This is 100 stage dodge game. It is a game where you go through 100 stages and spend your time dodging a lot. That's all you need to know for the sake of the video, but you can check out all the other devlog playlists in the description. The last devlog will be in the corner of the screen, and yeah, let's get into it. So these clusters and vortexes are made up of the waste of enemies. Now, I'm not talking about that kind of waste. I'm talking about kind of the remnants of the enemies, because as you can see here, there's these particles that drop from the enemies as they're destroyed, or as after they self-destruct, and that's pretty much, it's pretty much kind of, the obstacle is kind of like a amalgamation or like a cluster of those remnants. That sounds pretty messed up, but remember, these are, or you might not remember, but these are robots. I've only actually said it like one other time, I think, but they are robots, so it's not as bad, and they don't have any feelings. Probably, they will damage you if you touch the red and blue particles emitting from them. There's the little white particles as well, but no paying attention to that for right now. And the main kind of feature of them, which is a lot of main features of them, honestly, is if you dash through them, just the dash ability, you will not take any damage. But if you don't dash, you will. So that is probably the main feature of the obstacle itself, but there's a lot more to it. So by first glance, you wouldn't understand that that's what you're supposed to do, and because I don't really explain it to you, but I do leave kind of like a hint in the game in the form of when the enemies are near the vortex or cluster, let's just call them clusters for now, they will dash too. So I'm hoping that the player kind of subconsciously sees that, oh, they're dashing, and then will kind of happen to come upon, or happen to dash in it and realize, oh, I didn't even take any damage. And I'm leaning more to kind of hint more towards that, but it's kind of like a start that the enemies do dash just automatically when near it. Kind of like they're trying to escape, pretty much. So when a stage is not active, meaning there's no enemies with timers below them, the obstacle will go into a dormant state. So it's not like most of the other obstacles, and it's kind of like the enemy that we covered in the previous devlog, where it kind of transcends the stage. So even though the stage is over, there's still enemies, or in this case, obstacles. But they won't, at least this obstacle won't damage you after a stage. It will just survive after, because it goes into this dormant state where it can't damage you when it's in its dormant state, basically. I'm trying to not say basically as much, but it's kind of difficult to do, basically. So one of the main reasons I did this is to prevent the obstacle from covering up the continue button, which is the way you continue on to the next stage. So I wouldn't want the player to get damaged, while they're trying to continue to the next stage. Like, I feel like it would mess everything up. So a second after the next stage starts, that's when it kind of reactivates. starts moving again. So now let me explain its strange kind of movement situation. It follows the position of enemies. That's simple enough, but it's only when they are weak. So once an enemy reaches about 5 seconds left on their timer, which represents their health, by the way, in a way. In a way, at least. Just think of it as that. It will follow that position. It will follow that position. So the way I did this is, if you're interested in the technicality of it, I do have an empty game object that teleports to the enemy once it's about to self-destruct at 5 seconds. So, and that's what the obstacle's following, not actually the enemy itself. So the health of the clusters is not expressed, really, but they do have health. And it goes away similarly to the enemy in the previous devlog, but in more of a random sense, but I'll spare you the explanation to make this a bit simpler, you know? So let's move on. So in terms of the way they spawn at the start of the game, but after the boss is defeated, which is stage 25, 50, and 75, and so on, they are destroyed, those ones that were spawned at the beginning, and new ones will spawn on stage 26, 51, 76, so on. Or that's pretty much it, because stage 100 is the final stage, so that actually is pretty much it. So the reason I did this is to somewhat separate the lumps of clusters and vortexes, so they don't all show up at once. But it's also mainly because of the saving situation. Now, if you don't know, which you probably don't remember, the game saves after the boss is defeated. So, stage 25, right after the boss is defeated, that's when the game saves, because it's just a convenient time for the game to save, you know? And I don't want to get into a situation where the vortex is kind of next to the player, and it's, say, stage 25, and the boss is defeated, and let's say there's a vortex nearby. I don't want to get into a situation where if you exit the game and then show back up into the game, the vortex is just gone, so you won't have to deal with them. And I could do a bunch of stuff where I save the position and the health and all that for the vortex, each specific vortex, or cluster. But it would just be too much work, and I think it would just be better just work around it, because it doesn't affect the game that much anyway. So yeah. Now let's go into the different variations. You've probably been seeing them on the screen. Blue, which is the cluster. So now we'll get into why it's clusters and vortex. So there's 2 clusters and 1 vortex. They're pretty much the same thing. Vortex is just kind of like the major version, like the strongest one, strongest variation. And so the 2 clusters is blue one, which is the weakest one, the smallest one, and all that. But I'm probably going to have it where it's a little bit faster. None of the stuff that's on screen right now, like, it's final. Like, it's all a work in progress, by the way, so I do have to change a lot with the speed and all that kind of stuff, but you could probably assume that. Same with everything else in the game. It's all subject to change. But anyway, the red one is kind of like middle of the road. And then the vortex, I was about to say the vortex cluster. The vortex is this really cool looking one with all the colors. I like the way the colors like combine with the red and then the like the light red and then the dark blue. It looks pretty nice, I think. And they'll probably end up having the most amount of health. They all work around the same. They all work pretty much the same though. And the final thing is these obstacles. They have the ability to push and pull enemies. And you. Specifically, pull enemies and push you. I know, they're rude. Anyway. So it kind of acts like a mini black hole in the sense of kind of pulling in the enemies, but it does reject the player. And the story earlier kind of explains it a little bit, as they are remnants of the enemies. So it makes sense it would kind of drag the enemies a bit closer. Well, it would push you away since you're not an enemy, right? So there's variations in the push-pull power that I call it between all three variations. You would assume that the giant vortex is going to have a stronger like pull or gravitational pull kind of thing going on than the tiny little blue cluster. And that's about it. Yeah, I know, it was a lot. I got this done in about a day, though. A day and a half. Everything that you're seeing on screen. So a lot of work that goes into just one little thing. It's not even done either. So there's a couple things that I still need to add. That is sound effects, which is the simplest thing. So an issue I've ran into is overlap with the vortex in the clusters, or the clusters in general. Well, like they'll like overlap and they'll kind of go to the same position, so it will kind of not look right. So I'm gonna make some changes to that so they don't do that as much. And like I said before, the clusters do have health, so I do want a kind of a representation, or I mean feedback, for when they're actually getting damaged. I think they're all going to have the same amount of health though, so I don't think a specific health bar is going to be necessary, because they'll all have the same amount of health. Eventually you'll know, like, oh, this took damage 4 times or 5 times and then they got destroyed. So yeah, now I know for next time it's gonna be like constant, I think. So yeah, that's about it. And wow, this was complicated. It seems like such a simple game, you know? You look at that and it's just like, oh, it's the block and then squares. I mean, how did I mess up that explanation? I was okay. Let's start over. So there's some squares. There's a triangle and a circle. Like, how is this game this complicated? I honestly don't know. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you all enjoyed the video. And a few things I want to work on next, I would say, is power-ups, new enemies, and music soon. Honestly, I need new music pretty bad. So yeah, and once I get a lot more stuff there's a lot more stuff to do before I can update the game. and have you guys actually play it. So I'm gonna go to work on that soon. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video.